your potted history, just so I can kind of place where you are, because your name is so familiar, and I know you've been doing the kind of advisory consulting kind of thing, but yeah, just a little background and I'll give you the same back. Yeah.
Sure. Well, and again, I entered the high-tech field in the early 80s and gravitated towards procurement because there were pressing problems. So, for example, one of the more notable projects I worked on was the Department of National Defense MRO procurement platform, creating that to support their IT infrastructure.
Yep.
And the Government of Canada's Scientific Research and Experimental Development Program funded my research into a theory I developed called strand commonality, where seemingly disparate strands of data actually have attributes that are related and collectively have an impact. And so, to condense the story short, when I came in, SHL, who was part of MCI, was managing that contract, and they were about to lose it. The contract was calling for 90% next day. They were delivering 51% next day. And they came to me and they said, automate our system. We need to automate. And I said, hold on a second. Let me ask a few questions. And the first question I asked was, what time of day do orders come in? And they looked at me and they said, what is, just trust me, give me an answer. And they said, most of the orders come in at 4 o'clock. I said, With research, I found that there were two types of commodity characteristics: historic flat line, which were more direct and more conducive to centrally negotiated contracts where the price would stay steady.
Yeah.
And what we identified as dynamic flux, where, when they tried to pull those through to ERP platforms and negotiate a contract, the price within a relatively short period of time would become irrelevant because it would go down. And so I said, okay, so you're supporting the IT infrastructure. Orders are coming in at 4 o'clock. Let's look at that for a second. What's the impact? And there were two. One, on delivery performance, because most of the parts they were sourcing were from the US and they had to clear customs and they got held up in customs. And by the way, most of the suppliers from whom they were sourcing were small, medium suppliers, so they weren't sophisticated with these things.
Yeah.
The second problem is that with a dynamic flux product, a part that costs $100 at 9 in the morning, by 4 o'clock was $1,000. And I said, now, so why are the orders coming in? Follow me on that stream, I told them. The service department, another agent, because I've been an advocate of agent-based versus equation-based modeling for a long time. The service department had technicians who were what you could call incentivized to do as many service calls in a day as possible. Now, the policy was order parts after each service call, but because it was a cumbersome system for them, they would do what's known as sandbagging. They would hold on to all the orders until the end so that they could meet their upfront requirement, which was we hit our target of service calls. The problem is when it comes in late, higher price and less efficiency. Now, just as a side note, on the other side of that achievement of hitting their target, their call close rates were horrific because the parts weren't coming in to service the calls that they had rushed to diagnose the problem. But they didn't see that connection. See, that's where strand commonality and attributes come in. And so what I did, I said, look, we're not going to change the service department overnight, but they're going to gradually realize that, wait a second, if we order it after each call, we're going to get the part in on time. So what we have to focus on is how do we get the part in on time? So I went to what I call the three other agents in the configuration, which were the small, medium enterprises, and created a system utilizing advanced self-learning algorithms that would weight. This is in the late 90s, early 2000s. That would weight the historic performance in areas such as delivery and quality. And it would also look at new requirements, like what is the current price? What is the geographic location? What's the odds of that? And of course, the system was self-learning because the more experience it had. So we created a system that enabled us to expand the engagement of suppliers at a time where everyone was saying, well, we got to do vendor rationalization. And keep that in mind, because there's a story in there. So we said, okay, so easy to bid, easy to respond. The buyer, by the way, had options for the two waiting. If it was a rush delivery and had to be here next day, the system would rank the supplier according to their performance in these key areas. However, there were some instances where price was the point. So the buyer could manually go in and say, I'm going to change the weighting average and put it more on price. And the system would automatically, the algorithms automatically recalculate and re-rank the suppliers. So it was an early day weighting system, but it was an important one. Then what we said is, once you get an order approved, we press the button as the supplier and a PDF purchase order is sent. But there's another problem. There's other agents in this equation, isn't it now? There's the courier and customs, Canada Customs. So UPS had approached us because they had heard about the work we did. And what we did is build a bridge from UPS into our system, where as soon as a purchase order was generated, we hook up into their system, we generate the waybill number through our same system and pre-print the waybill number. And at the same time, it would automatically dispatch UPS. So the supplier only had to worry about printing the PO and printing the waybill and packing slip. Didn't have to do anything else and pulling the product. But we had a third problem, which was customs. And at that time, in late 90s, early 2000, customs treated computer parts on a priority basis. You had if you knew how to do it. So what we did is we talked to customs. We said, what do we need on the forms? And they said, here's the format and the framework. So what we did is added a third form. So as soon as the PO was issued to the winning supplier, they would receive the purchase order PO or in a PDF. They would receive the shipping and waybill number and not have to worry about calling a courier. And they would receive the properly completed customs clearance documents.
Nice. Nice.
Once that went through and all went through, within 3 months, it went from 51% next day delivery to 97.3% day delivery. Now, the beauty of all of this is, and I called it the train yard management system with the buyers, a centralized manager could actually see what each one was doing. And the information would be real time and the system would learn and learn. Now, what was interesting is that over a 7-year period, 6-7 year period, their cost of goods consistently went down 23% in line with the dynamic flux product. What was even better is within 18 months, the collective buying group of 23, collective multiple companies that were involved in the process went down to 3. So we cut the FTEs on that. So it was like, we're pretty happy with this. New York City Transit Authority then called us, and they had a different requirement. And I want you to see the whole layout of this, because it goes to what we're talking about today, about scalability with the flexibility to develop. They were supporting the 5 boroughs in New York through a central warehouse. Now, you know New York. Traffic is crazy, and they had a same-day delivery requirement, right? So what I said is, let's create a time zone polling capability. We'll go to each of the boroughs, and within each borough, we'll find 10 strategic stocking locations. So you don't have to carry that inventory, but these people don't have to worry about extra burden on them because we've got this easy system to give them the PO. And what it would do with the time zone polling is a request would come in, let's say for Brooklyn. What it would do is it would go to the first supplier who's strategically, geographically located to meet the best time delivery. If he didn't have the supplier or they didn't have the supplier, it'd go to a second and a third. Now, on those instances where no one had this particular part, it would automatically be dispatched to strategic sourcing, which was using the system platform that we did for the D&D. So that was, again, this was in 2001. I made probably one of the biggest mistakes in my life at that point, which I thought, really, to get this off the ground and traction, I'm not going for VC money. I'll sell the company to a publicly traded TSE company. They'll put the resources behind me because they'll help me to create the scalability and give me the capability. Now, bear in mind, we were an attractive takeover target, Mark, because in our last year, we did $3.2 million in sales. Remember, this is Emerald Parts, but our
Cool.
profit was 2.1 million.
Nice.
So company was
Nice.
saying, you come with
Yeah.
a role in there. So sold the company, and I regret that to this day, because now everything I'm talking about, everything I'm saying about the structure and I call it the Tony Bennett effect. Tony Bennett became very popular later in life. I think some say even more popular. The industry is caught up with that. Everyone's talking about AI and Gen AI. Now, I will say this: when I gave a lecture to an automotive industry group of supplier executives, they're concerned with, well, that's great, but how long will it take the system to learn? Because the system has to learn. So you have this ramp-up period.
Of course. Yeah.
And it's not going to be overnight. And we got into other discussions like, okay, are there partitions between the D&D and within the New York City Transit Authority? Are they direct competitors? How many of the suppliers over in the D&D are for the NYTC and vice versa? And so we started building this master database of where there was, the client, D&D and New York City Transit were anonymous to everybody.
Yeah.
But we built up this master, and we started to get more and more suppliers approaching us, because it was easy to do business. And most of the SMEs, and I learned this from maybe 8 years prior, when digital signatures first came out, everyone said, okay, we're going to put this into the system. Most SMEs are most of the supplies coming from, when you're looking at, let's say, MRO, they didn't have the technological know-how. They weren't going to go digital signatures. They weren't going to, they weren't what they are like today. So now the final thing, and I'll fill in, is that shortly after, I got a call from one of the largest PC retailers in the United States. And they said, look, we had done a vendor rationalization strategy. What we did is we said, we're going to compress all these hundreds and hundreds of suppliers down to 100. And our logic for doing this was, number one, we'd be able to leverage the best price, volume purchasing, and our administrative costs would go down, because it's so hard to deal with all of these different suppliers. And they had it in place for about 2 years. And they said, could you do an assessment as to, and there's a very important lesson I learned here. Can you do an assessment? How competitive are we? Because our statistics show, whoa, we're saving money year 1 and 2, but the savings are going to get a little bit less and less and less as we get deeper into these relationships. And I looked at it and I said, okay, well, I've got the program that I can be able to get that information using the algorithms. But I said, you do realize when you compress your vendor or supplier base down to 100, that ultimately becomes your source of truth. In other words, you've lost sight with the rest of the market, and your competitiveness is here. And went in there, ran the process for them, and they're paying something like 21% over market price because of the inefficiencies of systems, the ERP systems and all that. The administration was too hard, but they were able to see, wait a second, the savings we get up front dissipate very, very quickly.
We've also got single suppliers with big contracts.
So that's really the heart of the background. After I sold the company, then I started Procurement Insights. You probably read a lot of my articles. I ghostwrite for both practitioners and providers. There's a group called Procurement Foundry. I don't know if you've heard of them.
Oh yes, Tanya. No. Anyway, yes, I know the name. So
for the first 2 years when they launched,